Welcome to today's session on upper tail test. Upper tail test is also called as two-tail test. A two-tail test is used to test the statistical significance of the hypothesis of the data set to accept or reject the hypothesis. That is, we are based on the p-value, we are either going to accept or reject the hypothesis. Okay, so this is called as two-tailed test. Okay, so either we accept or reject the hypothesis. So that is two-tailed test is also called as upper tail test. Okay, so for that let's take an example. Say the hypothesis is 12% of the apples harvested in an orchard last year were rotten. Okay, so we know the data that 12% of the apples harvested in the last year were rotten. Okay, so for this year we have the data that is 30 out of 214 apples in the harvest sample this year turns out to be rotten. Okay, so for this year data we have 30 out of 214 apples are rotten. In the previous assumption, the hypothesis is that 12% of the apples harvested um, were rotten. Okay, so our null hypothesis is 12 percentage of the apples harvested are rotten, or we are having less than 12% of the apples rotten this year. So that is the null hypothesis. Okay, so we are going to check whether we are going to reject this null hypothesis or accept this hypothesis. Okay, so the proportion for the rotten apples in the harvest is 12% this year. Okay, so whether we are going to see whether it is below 12%. So the null hypothesis is that whether the rotten apples are below 12 percentage this year. Okay, so that is the null hypothesis. So for testing this two-tailed test, we use the function prop.test, as we have used the same in one-tailed test. Okay, so the data we have is 30 apples out of 214 apples, and the probability of the rotten is 12%. So only I have given p, the parameter p is equal to 0.12, and alt equal to greater means it's a two-tailed test or upper tail test. Okay, and correct equal to false is the default parameter. Okay, so let me run this syntax and see what is the p-value. Okay, so the p-value here is the 0.1401. Okay, so this value is greater than 0.05, that is greater than 5% level of significance. So we cannot reject the null hypothesis. Since the p-value is greater than 5% level of significance, we accept the null hypothesis. We do not reject the null hypothesis. So the null hypothesis is that the number of rotten apples is below 12% this year. Okay, so we accept the hypothesis that the rotten apples are below 12% this year. Okay, so this is what we have understood from upper tail test. Okay, or two tail test. Okay, so hope it was a useful session. So let us see in the next session.